Welcome to the Touch MBA Admissions Podcast. Do you need help figuring out which schools to apply to or how to get into the world's top MBA programs? Hey, you're not alone. Join thousands of others on this podcast and on our site, touchmba.com, as they seek the admissions edge. And now, here's your host, Darren Joe.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Touch MBA podcast. I'm your host, Darren Joe, and it has been a minute. No, I have not been on vacation. I've simply been working on some other parts of Touch MBA, like our MBA guides, which I hope you check out. We just wrote a new social impact guide, the 6 best programs to launch your career in social impact as an MBA. So yeah, do check out our guides at touchmba.com/guides. But I have taken some time as well to kind of reflect on what value we're adding for you guys with the podcast, with our guides, with our free school selection help service. And I've been really thinking through where to focus our energy to help MBA applicants make the best investment decision. So look out for many more podcasts here at Touch MBA, as well as more guides and a revamp of our core service, which is giving you guys free school selection help. And you can get that at touchmba.com. So with that housekeeping out of the way, it was really fun to, turn on the microphone and record this podcast with my friend Tony Ngo, who is an EdTech entrepreneur in Vietnam. So this interview I'd categorize as a careers episode. We talk about how Tony didn't necessarily break into his career in private equity, post-MBA and hedge funds, but rather how he pivoted, having worked in that industry, to an emerging market in Vietnam, how he did that. We talk about lessons learned from Harvard Business School, lessons learned from working in finance and pivoting to be in education and pivoting to starting his own business, and also dealing with all the life issues in between all that, getting married and having a family and being far from the family as well. So I think you guys will really get a lot out of this episode. Tony's a great communicator and has a way of really distilling his hard-earned lessons into advice I think you can apply right away to your own careers. So yeah, I hope you enjoy this careers episode about breaking into EdTech. Let's get to my conversation with my buddy, Tony Ngo. I'm thrilled to have our next guest on the show because he's someone I've known a long time. He's someone I admire. He is the co-founder and executive chairman of Everest Education. He's also the independent director of Nam Long Investment Corporation. He's a founder and board member of Sponsors for Educational Opportunity Vietnam, an organization I have spoken to many times. And prior to Everest, he was an investor in long-short equities, a hedge fund at Bridger Capital. He's a Harvard Business School graduate. He graduated in 2008. He's also a Stanford grad, where he got a master's in industrial engineering and a bachelor's in economics. But he's a fellow, I would say, EdTech entrepreneur. He's an investor. He's a community builder. And I think a lot of you will enjoy learning from his journey through multiple industries. So Tony Ngo, welcome finally to the Touch MBA podcast.
Thank you so much, Darren. This is kind of weird. I don't think I've ever received such a formal introduction in my entire life before, with all the paper achievements listed out like that before. So thank you. But I think most importantly, you've failed to mention how I've been on the receiving end of getting schooled by you on the basketball court many a time, in our younger days.
That's exactly. We would have 6 a.m. workouts where Tony lives, because he gets started that early. So I would be there with my eyes half closed. We'd be doing drills, and yeah, it was a good time. It was a good time. That's how we really know each other. So, but Tony, I thought we could start first with your years surrounding Harvard Business School. Like if you could just tell our audience a bit more about what you were doing before. And then, of course, like anyone listening to this podcast, what made you interested to get an MBA, why you chose HBS, and tell us a bit more about that pre-applicant journey there.
Sure. Yeah. So once again, no, in all honesty, thank you so much, Darren, for this opportunity to share my experience. I just hope that it's helpful for others who are out there. And, if I can answer more questions, feel free to contact me. I'll leave you all my information so your guests can ping me later. But yeah, first and foremost, on the journey itself, I did a pretty straight and narrow finance path from my undergraduate time at Stanford and post-graduation all the way through to 2015. I spent 15 years as first an investment banker in the Silicon Valley area, helping tech companies, graduated right when the dot-com bubble burst, perfect timing, jumping into private equity in Chicago, where I followed my now wife, then girlfriend, where she was doing medical school. And then deciding that I really wanted to actually pivot my career to Asia and specifically Vietnam, and using business school as a launching pad to experiment and kind of get a lot of free space to learn about the market and network while not really taking a step back in my career, right? I'm adding to my credentials during that time period. So it was a phenomenal experience at HBS, and I'll can share about how I really believe I loved it and got a ton out of the experience, in particular, given what my objectives are. But at the same time, I tell many of my friends and even my co-founder, Don, I was like, look, I don't know if you need to go to business school. Like, it really depends on what the context of what you want is. But for me, it absolutely made a ton of sense. And I made sure to optimize the 2 years I had at HBS to get as much out of that experience for what I wanted to design my life. And hopefully that's helpful for others.
Yeah. I mean, did you have, like you mentioned, you wanted to pivot towards Vietnam, but did you have a certain industry you wanted to pivot into post-MBA, right? That's a big question on the mind of most applicants.
So I like to break down career development into 3 spheres. I'm sure you've thought about this as well, and hopefully all your folks think about it as well. So the industry, the geography, and then the function that you do, right? And so I was in finance as an investor, but I was pan industry for a long, long time in the US. I started out in tech, but then I expanded to be a generalist investor, but I was very America focused. And for me, the pivot was really on geography. And just because I was Vietnamese by blood didn't mean I had a right to necessarily be a successful investor in Vietnam. So I knew that I needed to find the right platform for myself, the right opportunity, so that I could leverage my strengths and have teammates who could cover up some of my weaknesses, I think, at that time. So yeah, it was not pivoting industry so much for me as just geography. I wanted to stay in finance at that time.
Got it. And do you remember any like emotional or interesting moments with your application journey, applying and getting into HBS, or anything that really stood out, or lessons you could share?
Oh my God.
It's a long time ago, I know, but
no. It's crystal clear to me because
okay. There we go. That's good. That's good.
I got in a huge fight with my wife. Or mainly she got really mad at me.
Yeah.
For wanting to pivot my career to Vietnam.
Yes.
It's like, I've known you all this time. We've been dating and you've been building this career in US. Maybe I thought we'd be in California or New York, but like, what the heck are you doing? Like wanting to go to Vietnam? And it was my application essay that crystallized for me. This is an itch that I just had to at least try and scratch and see if it was fulfilling, see if I could have an impact. And we had many a conversation. It forced me to have this big boy moment before we were even a family, but that I think was a very pivotal decision for myself, but also for our relationship and my career. So we spent a lot of time talking about it there, and a lot of stress, to be perfectly honest, to make sure that what I wanted could still align with this future that we were trying to build together.
Absolutely. And was that, so you guys were married before you applied to business school, or
Mm-mm.
just to, oh, okay. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So this is what made it more
Okay.
stressful, is like we were dating very seriously
Yes.
for 6 years, but it's like with the intention that we're on this path. But so it was like she was a doctor and building her career in academia, which required her to really be at top academic medical universities here in the US. And so for her, it wasn't even really an option to kind of go to Vietnam per se, maybe Singapore. So we tried and looked at that as a potential compromise. But for me, it was like, well, I have so many options. Why not just stay in New York? Why not just stay in California? Like, what the hell are you doing? You're being so selfish. So a lot of conversations along those lines.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think this is actually, if you don't mind spending a bit more time on this, a really important topic that we haven't really covered much, and that's relationships in business school. And I mean, would you have any tips there about how to have that conversation, or looking back, ways you could have done it better? Because I'm sure many applicants will have a similar issue.
So I think when you're at these big life decisions, whether you want it to or not, it's a defining moment, because you have to choose one or the other. I either had to choose like what I thought was in my heart, my calling to at least try this journey to pivot my career towards Asia, and meaning I live there at least for some time, or I have to like commit to my relationship, right? And for a year, I thought, oh my God, it might not be possible to do both. And I have to pick one and give up the other. And so at that point, it's like a test, I think, of whether or not you're serious in this relationship and whether your partner is serious as well. We ultimately have gotten through it and made this journey together, but it hasn't always been easy, is the honest answer, right? Like when I first met you, I was living full time in Vietnam, right? And we were starting a family, and my son had just been born. So I had to start shifting my time a bit more. But my family has had to deal with a ton of sacrifice with me being gone all the time. But I made my wife a promise. I said, at any point, if you are unhappy with how things are going, you have the right to pull the plug, and I will reorient my career and pivot back. And she hasn't done it. There have been stressful times where I think she's thought about doing it, but I think giving her the power to make that decision was psychologically very important for both of us, that we're making this decision together. And I'm not just imposing my will, right? Like she has an eject button that doesn't blow up the marriage per se. It ejects my career, but I accepted to do that. So it's like, give me the option to try it and see if we can make it work out. If it's ever not compatible, we'll reset.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think that'll be really helpful to a lot of our listeners. So yeah, your HBS experience, if we can talk a little bit about you landing that first job. I mean, I'm just wondering how that recruiting experience was for you. Like, did you follow the sort of common recruiting path into hedge funds, or how did you find that first job? And that was with Bridger Capital, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So Bridger Capital is like in the Tiger management family, so the Tiger Cub lineage there. But let me rewind and do something a little bit more general even. I feel like underappreciated skill is how to network your way to jobs. And although I have participated in many, many resume drops, I have never once landed a job because of a resume drop. So if you go back to my first college internship at Solomon Smith Barney, I got because of a networked introduction from a alumni at Stanford, an older upperclassman. I got my first, my junior year internship through SEO in New York with Credit Suisse First Boston in their tech group. Super hard to get, very competitive. Again, I networked my way through a friend who had gone through that department at CSFB to help make sure that he paved the way to at least get me on the radar beyond the normal resume drop. And of course I did all the resume things on top of that, but I needed to make sure my application stood out and I had a reasonable chance. My first job at Morgan Stanley, same thing, reaching out to people who had gone ahead. When I went out to Chicago to go outside of tech, where I had my existing network, I found a private equity job by cold calling and networking my way, flew myself out to Chicago, on my own dime 3 weekends, I think, just to see if who's willing to take a meeting on a Friday or Monday with me, just so that I could learn about the opportunities there. And then a few months later, I ended up with my, full-time pre-MBA job as a private equity associate. And same thing, even in business school, my internship in business school, I was TPG's first employee in Vietnam as a MBA intern, not because there was any posting. There was no posting. I networked my way through friends who had been at TPG, who then kind of connected me to the relevant folks, and found out that, hey, they had just made a successful investment in Vietnam and they wanted to follow up on that. So we created an internship. And the same exact thing happened in business school. So I came back from my business school experience in internship in Vietnam, and a first year HBS student reached out to me. It's like, hey, I saw you had this experience with TPG in Vietnam over the summer. Would you be willing to grab coffee? Super, super smart gentleman by the name of Nitin, who worked at Bridger, had set up Bridger's Vietnam fund, and just happened to be full-time in school while full-time managing this Vietnam fund that they had set up.
Wild.
And fast forward 6 months from there, he recruited me to basically replace him to run Bridger's fund in Vietnam. And then from there, my role expanded multiple times to include outside of Vietnam, not just private equity, but also public equities, different sectors and all that. But like, not a single job I've ever had where I've worked for someone else did I ever get it because I resume dropped. So if there's any one lesson I have for people, is like, there is tremendous value in the grit and perseverance of finding and creating your own pathways. And you don't have control over who says yes to your meetings and everything, but like, there's a huge difference in potential opportunity when you are proactive and intentional about your choices versus waiting for stuff passively to come to you. So that would be my one advice. I don't know how in your life experience you found it, but like, I found that it's been huge to just have that mindset, that like, to not wait around.
No, and I love that, you gave us more context of your entire career journey and how that has worked for you. I mean, one question I have there is, you said, I networked my way, right? Like, I flew to Chicago for 3 weekends, but what does that mean to you to do it in a way that is effective, but helps the people you're networking as well? Because I know you're a great community builder as well. And so, I'm curious if you have any tips on how to do it. Network can maybe make some people shudder, right, when they hear it.
That's a great point. I don't view it as networking in the sense of like, oh, I'm trying to like wheel and deal and get something out of this. Like, I'm genuinely trying to find ways to help whoever it is I'm meeting, right? And so if you go in with that lens, I always start with questions, right? Whether I'm meeting with CEOs, executives now, or investors, or my own staff, or whoever it is, like, asking questions of like, hey, what is important to your strategy now, right? Where do you see the firm heading? And, what are some of the near-term priorities in the next 1, 2, 3 years? And, are there gaps? Are there areas that you could use help? And the answer may not be me, by the way. Like, oftentimes the answer is other people that I introduce. The reason SEO Vietnam started was like, when I came back to Vietnam, my networking, meeting with all these CEOs that I might invest in their companies, was like helping them actually answer this question. And the answer was always HR. How do I build a succession plan? I've gotten this company from 0 to 1. I want to take it from 1 to 10, 10 to 100, but like, I need a deeper bench. I need more people. And so I ended up just reaching out to friends in the US and trying to see, oh, can I help them while I help this other executive? And lo and behold, like, within 2 years, probably a dozen people over the first 2 years probably moved from the US to jobs in Vietnam because of introductions I had made. And that just lent itself to build a network very naturally. And so I think if you take it with an approach of like, not trying to asking, but find opportunities to give, is a better way to do it. And then, with flying to Chicago to ask for jobs, or even when I'm doing my Vietnam networking, like, or asking TPG on what their strategy is for Vietnam, it's just an open-ended question, right? Like, they know that I'm likely looking for a job. I'm either MBA student or whatever. So it's natural. And like, if it's a good fit, they'll bring it up, right? But if not, no worries, right? Like, I actually networked to many organizations where I did not get an offer, right? But that's okay.
Yeah. Yes. So I love that. So you're leading with questions, you're picking up data points, and you're focused on how you can help and contribute, right, to these organizations. And they know, you're looking for a job. Exactly. So I think that's great advice. I mean, now that, you graduated in 2008, so it's coming upon your 15th anniversary, right? At HBS.
Oh, damn, man. Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome for making that super concrete for you. So, but I'm just wondering, looking back, kind of what you wish you knew about the MBA, the entire process from applying to going through it. And then afterwards, maybe you've been involved in some alumni stuff. Like, what advice you would have for applicants, thinking about the MBA and trying to make the best investment there, trying to make the best choice for their career? Yeah, what would you tell them?
So I think I approached the MBA experience very, very intentionally with this laser focus on exploring this Vietnam question. So for me, I think I got a ton of value because I was always driven to how do I answer that question. And I find that my friends who were more open-ended, like, I don't know what I want to do, but then if they don't take proactive steps to try and at least structure a process to answer that question, they ended up just kind of floating around doing a little bit of everything. And it's a really intense time period, right? So when the banks come around, when the funds come around, when the consulting companies come around, when the big tech companies come around, they're dropping resumes everywhere and being super diluted. Whereas I was, I think, hyper-focused, perhaps maybe too much, because at that time, everybody thought I was crazy to try and go to this emerging market that no one wanted to be in. They're like, you're shutting yourself off. But like, to me, that was the most important question that I wanted to answer. But I felt that like I had already made that mistake when I was in undergrad. At Stanford, I floated for a good amount of time, and I wasted opportunities instead of working with professors on research, instead of joining friends to do a startup, instead of even going study abroad because I was intentional about trying to get that experience. I think I just did whatever people put in front of me, said like, hey, you should go do this. So to be honest, like, people ask me now about like all the degrees I have. I somewhat regret doing the master's in industrial engineering because I did it in the same 4 years as I did my undergrad, which meant I had to squeeze in a ton of classes and had no room for electives. So although I valued the degree, the opportunity cost was super high. Should I have worked on a design project with like someone cool at the design school? Should I have done an engineering challenge? And like, there are a ton of other things that I closed doors off to just because I was told that, hey, that's like the competitive thing to do if you really want to optimize for finance. And I didn't even spend time to think about, is that really what I want to do? So by the time I got to HBS, I think I had internalized that lesson. And I said, look, I want to make sure I really learn from this. And so I kind of designed a lot of my own experiences and networking to fulfill that. And the coursework I took was designed around that as well. But so to me, that's probably the most valuable life lesson that I took away prior to business school and then applied to my experience there.
Yes, I love that. Like, basically your advice is, what's the most important question you have to answer, right? Like, have that forefront in your mind. Like, basically almost have a guiding question, a guiding thought for your experience. Otherwise, it's just too much.
Yeah.
Too easy to be distracted.
Every
right?
night there's 3 to 5
right?
social events going on that of course I want to go to. And
yes.
Speakers to go see, like CEOs and amazing people coming all the time to campus. And you just don't have enough hours in the day, right? So
and what about succeeding in private equity and hedge funds? I mean, you were in that industry for a long time. Just what thoughts do you have to share with applicants who, will be entering that industry as MBA grads and then, trying to climb the ladder, so to speak?
Yeah, I'm very thoughtful to not overgeneralize, because I know within my experience, I was a fundamental investor, right? I analyze industries, I analyze companies, and then I pick good ones to back, and I pick hopefully bad situations to short there. But for me, my comments, I think, are very specific to that style of investing as opposed to other folks. But for the most part, people who come out of the MBA programs are typically going into those types of investing jobs as opposed to like quant trading or, other things. But yeah, so with that big caveat, I think there's always so much noise as an investor that I think the process of filtering out the noise is the single most important skill set to hone. And actually, as a public market investor, I had to unlearn some of the private equity habits that I had, right? And maybe because I was also like a junior private equity person, I was a pre-MBA associate, right? So there you're just processing due diligence request lists and building models out and doing all that. But again, like being intentional, being targeted with why do you want to do this investment? What is your core investment thesis? And if you had to filter through all the different things, what are the most important things you have to get right? Right. I think with private equity, because you're investing into an illiquid asset and you're locked in for several years, you have to do more diligence and you have to be more thorough. But with public markets, you can get out, right? You can buy and then sell a month later, a week later, if you feel that you're wrong. So you have more leeway. So your discipline should be, I think, much more around your core thesis. The timing of it matters much more than versus private equity. But I've loved the competitiveness of all these investing jobs in general. I'm a hyper competitive person. And I know that about myself, and I loved being measured. For a lot of people, it freaks them out and stresses them out. I loved seeing my numbers on a day-to-day basis, on a relative basis, on an absolute basis. So I think some people don't like that, and you definitely should not be doing public equities if that's, a fear that you have.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, any other thoughts there on kind of your career sort of pre-Everest? So we're going to jump into that. But
Ooh. I mean, no matter what phase of your career, no matter what field, I think is to always have this humility that you never know what you don't know. So even though I had done a bunch of deals in a certain industry before, didn't necessarily mean that I was the best at it, because there could be something I missed, and to always keep an open mind to identifying what that risk is as quickly as I possibly could. When I transitioned my finance career from the US to Vietnam, I knew that one of the biggest blind spots was like, I can do investing analysis, right? Like that part is the easy part. I can read company filings, I can do the industry research, talk to customer suppliers, do all the memo writing. What I will need help with is really understanding the Vietnamese regulatory environment, the cultural environment, and how it's different. Like at a minimum, it's going to take me some time if I'm ever going to penetrate that and master that at all. But I shouldn't be naive that I would just tackle it with ease, having never worked there before, right? Or even having only done a summer internship before. The summer showed me that there's a lot of things I did not know, right? So
yeah, I mean, on that cultural note, I'm actually really curious about that. Like, because, you're of Vietnamese ethnicity, but you're in Vietnam. And I mean, I'm just personally curious how you go about learning those cultural nuances in an industry like finance, and we'll get to education soon. But, and because I think that's critical, but oftentimes, at least for me, I kind of stumble upon them. I feel like you're a more systematic person than me. So I'm wondering if, you have any thoughts there.
Part system, part luck as well, like stumbling on it. But yeah, maybe the system part creates those opportunities to stumble on it. So the internship at TPG was a rude awakening into the Vietnamese business environment. I imagined, I'm working at this big global world-class investment platform. I'll be building models all summer. I'll be like, doing all these things. Turned out I spent almost no time in Excel or PowerPoint. 90% of my day was spent meeting people, networking in a very loose sense, and just hearing how, for one, like business and politics in Vietnam intersect a lot. but probably in ways that are not dissimilar, if I'm honest, with like big business in the US and government, right? So but I got to see it firsthand, and how on a very positive note, how business can actually influence government directions, policy, tones, diplomacy. But at a practical level, I sat in a room in Hanoi for the summer. The office was a room that's a tenth of the size of this room, where 6 of us would sit around a small desk, and I was the only one who was not fluent in Vietnamese. And I was hearing Hanoian Vietnamese, which is also very different than the Vietnamese I grew up with. Even though my parents are like Bac Nam Tu, they moved down in 54, or the families like are from that generation, and then also moved to the States. So my Vietnamese dialect has evolved in a different way, and my vocabulary was very different and not as rich. And so I was just bombarded with language and jokes, and that I didn't get for the whole summer. But I loved learning all these different things, and didn't mind even being made fun of. It was fun. And so just being open-minded to like learn as fast as I can, I think helped me. And then being cognizant that despite my ethnicity, I am still an outsider, and just being respectful of that whenever I'm meeting, to not impose my way of thinking, but asking questions and being helpful again is a good way to at least just form genuine relationships, I think, in any culture.
No, yeah, I love that. Because, I think a lot of people might think, oh, okay, I'm from Stanford, I'm from HBS, and I'm going to, come in and work in finance in Vietnam and do this or that. But being kind of open-minded and humble, and always, trying to learn from whatever situation, it can be so helpful. Yeah. So let's talk about SEOV and Everest Education. So, okay, maybe you could first start with what each of those organizations does, and why you started them.
Yeah. Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, SEO Vietnam, is a platform to develop responsible leadership for Vietnam. We are building a community of fantastic people that you're a part of, where we have over 600 fellows now who have gone through this summer experience, where they come for a job, they come for an internship with Vietnam's best companies. But through the training, through the mentorship, through the coffee chats, their minds are expanded, their expectations of themselves are stretched, and they start to build this social capital with other professionals, other young students, and other very senior executives all throughout the country, who are passionate about trying to help Vietnam develop in a responsible way. And then they join and become this alumni community that is becoming the movers and shakers in the country. So I'm really, really proud to see that they've not only been incredibly successful in their own careers, but they are also giving back to their communities, right? Not just to SEO itself, but to their families, their neighborhoods, their other nonprofits that they're involved with. So it's a very loose organization, to be honest. We're 100% volunteer driven. There's no one on salary, and we operate on a shoestring budget, but I think we have disproportionate impact on all that because of the passion of people who want to just give back in a meaningful way. So I started it kind of by accident as an outgrowth of wanting to just be helpful, and then asking myself the question, like, is there a way to standardize this a bit more beyond just like connecting people as like a headhunter? And so I was like, oh, well, if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to devote any time, let's try and do something meaningful that builds a community. And then just had so many people raise their hands to say, oh, I'd love to be a trainer. Can I be a mentor? Can I help you run the operations? And then each alumni class would turn around and participate to help the next class. So it just has been this amazing snowball effect, where the pay it forward mentality has really produced an amazing community that I'm just really proud. To be honest, like, I get an unfair amount of credit for just having started it, but like, I don't do any of the heavy lifting anymore. There's dozens of people now, and it's driven by alumni. Alumni dominate the board. They make all the key decisions. And I'm just happy to be there to help support them now. But yeah, it's like thanks to folks like you, Darren, that we're able to have this scale of impact and kind of know people in every corner of every industry, I feel like, in Vietnam.
I mean, I can speak personally. It's an amazing group of young professionals, and I've enjoyed, interacting with them every time, and I mean, how many people were in your first class? That first
5.
batch? There were 5, and then the year after that, roughly
12.
12. So this is, I want it to be clear, like this started very organically and it was small, right? 5 to 12, and then to what? Maybe
this last class had 30.
30.
And they finished with 28, I believe, who graduated.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the beginning, it was like me scrapping around, like asking Henry over at IDG Ventures and Tom at Horizon, like, hey, can you guys help me out? Just take a couple interns this summer. I'll mentor them. And then asking all my friends who are, in the US, like, hey, do you have any younger brothers, sisters who might want to apply to this program? I'll do all the tutoring myself, or the mentoring myself. And, I got 10 applications and 2 companies, and it was like, barely made it work that first year. But it was enough to kind of just kickstart this flywheel. So it's been awesome to see.
That's amazing. And, just being part of your Facebook group, I see how everyone's just trying to help each other out. Like it's amazing. It's just full of job opportunities, internship opportunities, and you don't encounter many groups like that online. So, okay, let's keep going because I know your time is short. So Everest Education.
Yeah.
Tell us more about that.
Sure. So Everest Education is education technology enabled company that has learning experiences for students offline as well as online. So offline, we operate a network of learning centers in Saigon today and offer college admissions consulting services for students all over the world via our online platforms. We also have partnered with the #1 live class education company in the world to launch VSpark here to bring world-class mathematics as our first subject to students all over Vietnam. And so we're really, really proud. We just launched this joint venture with them to localize a curriculum and systems to bring it to the Vietnamese market. And over the next couple months, you'll see this rolling out for all elementary students studying national curriculum in public schools.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Well, okay, before we get there, let's talk about, kind of what was the impetus behind, founding Everest Education? You had this successful career as an investor, right? Like, why jump into the education field in Vietnam? I mean, it's quite a big jump.
So yes and no. Like on paper, again, it seems like totally illogical, irrational to jump from like the peak of my finance career in hedge fund world to go do a startup from zero, right? Not even join another large Series C company and just take it public or something, but actually literally start from zero and build it up. But in retrospect, I felt this calling that kind of like my initial pivot to Vietnam in the first place, going back to the pre-MBA side. Like if I didn't at least make the jump to try it, I would forever regret it. And so the reflection at the time was, okay, I think I really do enjoy business. I do enjoy investing. But if I look at the root cause of what I am really excited about and the key experiences that I was most proud of was not the numbers I put up per se because of the numbers, but on the impact I was able to have on various situations, on various management teams to help coach them through some really gnarly situations, some really complex situations. And it was the interpersonal development that I got out of it. It was effectively like, even though I was an investor, I did a lot of executive coaching, informally as part of that. And on the side, like I could also see like I was spending nights and weekends to build SEO Vietnam and was also really enjoying that experience. So I'm like, is there a way to marry this leadership and education focus in a for-profit model? And then looking around doing the private equity style analysis, like what does the competitive landscape look like? Where do we think our strengths are? And is it a attractive market where we can have a meaningful presence? And so we set out on that journey. So it's definitely been much, much harder than I anticipated, to be perfectly honest. But the initial thought process was that this is the ultimate private equity bet on myself and my co-founder, on Don, that we can do something that is aligning our hearts with our wallets, right?
Yes.
And have very meaningful impact at the same time.
And how did that evolve for you? How did the product evolve? So I'm kind of curious with, from your first offering to now.
It's continuing to evolve quite a bit. So this is where I think Everest as a company is very different than almost every other education company in Vietnam. We are constantly upgrading our products. This VSpark partnership would not have happened had it not been for our impetus to continue to upgrade our online offering. So going back to the very beginning, we did just like math for Vietnamese students offline in a very traditional model. And then
but they were like kind of tutoring courses, right?
Tutoring.
Or how would you describe
classes,
it? Group classes. Yep.
Group classes, but national curriculum, just happened to be taught in English and by Don and Tony originally. And we pretty soon found out, I don't think we're the right ones to be teaching Vietnamese math curriculum, nor should it be really taught in English. And I don't think that's where the pain point in the market is. But as we went along, we found a clear pain point amongst students, especially in bilingual and international schools, who needed this critical thinking development through math. But to be honest, it would develop across horizontal skills, whether it's math or English or anything else. So over time, we've just added more grade levels from not just 7th and 8th grade, but now we go 1st through 12th grade. We've added more subjects. So mathematics, English, tutoring in all sorts of subjects. I think we have the best, hands down, SAT, ACT tutors in the market, all in the world. And we also now do the college admissions consulting piece of it, right, for all of our offline businesses there. And so we're constantly trying to follow our customers to see how their needs evolve and provide products that can stay with them and add more value over their journey. Now, the downside of that, I'll say, is that we chose a segment of the market. If you look at just international school, bilingual school, it's a small fraction of the overall market. But I think that's where we have a clear competitive advantage and where it makes sense for us to really focus our energies.
Mm-hmm. And then could you tell me a bit more about the VSpark? So that is serving that audience as well?
No. So
yeah, okay.
VSpark is a different intention. So we said, look, in order for us to really move to serve a broader audience, we have to do it with a different product. Number one, it has to be a totally different cost structure. And we saw a huge opportunity, especially in math. No one really doing it the way that we thought it should be done. And one of our strengths having been an international investor is the relationships around the world to see what has worked in other places and knowing people directly involved in all of these situations. So we're pretty on top of all the trends happening in other parts of the world and seeing what might make sense for us in Vietnam. So we've actually, for our entire existence, always been meeting with and exploring opportunities to bring other models and adapt them to Vietnam. But it wasn't until finding this one partner with Spark Education that made sense to say, hey, this is totally aligned with our pedagogical model. It is exactly what we were starting to build out with our own Spark Math product, just by coincidence called Spark Math. And we really, really see eye to eye on how operations should run. And so we're building something called VSpark now, which is taking the seed of what we had built, but leveraging hundreds of millions of dollars of investment to bring this out to close to 400,000 students around the world already, and adapt that for the local market. So
that's exciting. That's exciting stuff. I'm excited for you guys. I mean, I think in EdTech, right? My observation is just, it's hard. There's so much new technology coming out. There's also, like you said, constantly changing consumer base and constantly changing expectations from students and their parents, let's be honest, right? And then it's COVID happens. So how do you manage all these things, right? How do you feel like COVID has really affected the EdTech landscape? I mean, it's just, yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. I'll stop talking there.
It's actually been pretty disruptive. So you had forced adoption of online learning by lots of families, but low satisfaction with a lot of the what was put out. And so there was also these false positives that people thought, oh, this is the inflection point for online. And what we've seen is that in many cases, just like with other businesses that saw a big boom during the COVID, right? Whether it's Netflix or Peloton or e-commerce, right? Like, oh, when people can do in-person again, all things being equal, like some portion will switch back to offline, right? And at the same time, I think in our local context, like there is no dominant online player, zero, right? We have yet to see someone who wows customers through their online offering, right? So I think until that player emerges, it'll still be a relatively niche segment of the overall education landscape. Education in Vietnam is a multi-billion-dollar market. And in other places, you see 10, 20, 30% penetration rates of online. Yet in Vietnam, we're low single digits at best, right? And I think the reality is it's not because the technology is not there. It is. The internet bandwidth is certainly good enough. Devices are everywhere now. It's making sure the products are developed to really wow customers. You have to have that obsession with it. And look, I'm not arrogant enough to say that we've figured it out, but I'm really, really excited to see if we can nail it. Like, you should check out our vSpark product. It's hands down amazing. So, but we'll see. We'll see what the market thinks, and I'm sure we'll still need to iterate.
Yeah. And so, I'll be sure to link to everything we've talked about, from SEOV to Everest, Tony's business. But Tony, what thoughts do you have for MBAs who want to enter the EdTech field? Maybe you've recruited some yourself. What are you looking for? Like, are you looking for anything different in this industry versus, say what you were looking for when you were working at Bridger?
So for MBAs who want to work for EdTech companies as opposed to be founders themselves. Yeah.
Let's start there. And then let's move to the founder question. Okay. Because that's a good one, actually. I would like to talk about that as well.
I think there's a big distinction between those.
I'm glad you pointed that out. Yep.
Yeah. To join, I think any startup as a MBA, like you have to adjust your, I think, expectations to, again, be intentional. Like what are you trying to get out of it, right? Are you someone who's still really needing to learn something very specific? And if so, forget is it EdTech or not, like what is it that you need to learn and how do you design that first job so that it can meet that criteria? Or are you trying to maximize your dollars of earning, right? Which is like a different scenario, right? And like, then we talk about like, what is your risk tolerance, how much cash versus equity and all that. But what I found is for people who go into education and EdTech, they're by and large, the vast majority are driven by wanting to have impact first and foremost, right? Which is why I did it, right? And why all the people I know, my colleagues at Everest are doing this. Like we all have turned down opportunities that are far more lucrative, I think, at least in the short term, right? Than doing this. But so the first thing is you have to really make sure that you're aligned to the company's vision, whatever that vision is within the EdTech landscape. And are you really willing to devote yourself for a couple tours of duty there, be it 1 year or 5 years? Like, I think you don't need to believe that it's going to be forever, but you need to have a tour of duty mindset where you're adding value and contributing something concrete to that company. As an MBA, like you come in probably as one of the most expensive people within the company, certainly in the top decile. So if you're just a generalist MBA though, like where are you going to uniquely add value, right? It might be on the finance side or kind of operational efficiency side for these larger companies, or it might be around marketing expertise in particular. I feel like a lot of us, Everest included, are still trying to increase our sophistication, but I think having a very specific skill set that you want to bring is much better than saying, hey, I just want to get into the EdTech industry. So again, back to geography, function, and industry. Like if you've chosen this industry, leverage your existing functional experience, whether in sales, marketing, finance, strategy, consulting, whatever it is, to apply that skill set over. And then be clear, are you learning or earning? If you're earning, expect to have your feet held to the fire to produce results in order to justify that compensation, whether it's a big cash payday or a big slug of equity. If it's in the learning phase, then yeah, give yourself that maybe that 1 year, 2 years more, where you're going to say, hey, I know I'm new to this industry. I know I'm new even potentially to this function or geography, and kind of think about how to add value. Like where I've had the hardest time hiring this background is if they've come from outside education, they may not have enough Vietnam context yet, right? Maybe they've spent no time or very little time, and they're asking for a large like compensation. Like if you look at that geography, industry, function filter, you may not meet all three of those. You better at least meet two, right? And then, but if you have very high expectations, but you don't meet at least two of those filters, it's very hard for, I think, any company to economically justify too big a package. But, I think the space is big enough where certainly there's a lot of win-win opportunities to think about, especially if you're willing to get creative and double down on equity type packages. The EdTech scene, especially in Vietnam, is relatively small, right? There's not any unicorns. There's not that many well-funded players. So you're going to have to take a cash discount on salary, but maybe you can make it up in equity if you're willing to really roll up your sleeves, right? But again, you're only going to get the big slug if you can contribute something very concrete.
That's great advice. And then, for founders, being a MBA founder, yeah, and what are your thoughts there? Super general question.
I think HBS has gotten better at this, but I think we had a terrible curriculum for founders back then.
Interesting.
Yeah, we were trained 15 years ago to be CEOs and investors, not to be entrepreneurial creators. I think this is where, to be honest, Stanford is much stronger reputationally on that. Now, Harvard has identified it and has worked very, very hard over the last decade to really change that. Nitin Noria, Dean Noria, did a lot of work to launch like an innovation center, integrate it with the rest of the campus, be much more supportive of student and alumni ventures. But I think the MBA program, you have to recognize like the case study method is good at developing critical thinking skills and talking skills. But a lot of the entrepreneurial skill sets don't need all that much of that versus scrappiness, product market fit, basic go-to-market like skill sets, right? Like, and I think some of that you just got to do to learn it, but otherwise be on lots of project teams where you're trying these things.
Yeah. So basically you're saying jump into the fire as quick as you can. Is that kind of what you're saying there? Yeah. Tony, okay, I know you got to go. Thank you so much for coming on the Touch MBA podcast and sharing your experiences. I learned a lot actually that I didn't know about you from your earlier career, which is very interesting. And if you, I'll give you the stage one last time to just leave any last sort of imparting to advice to ambitious MBA applicants.
Just be intentional with what you want to do. I think don't make the mistakes I did of just plodding along just because you feel like you should, but take time to step back and reflect and look up great resources like yourself, Darren, or our team at Everest, if we can be helpful on those journeys as relevant, right? Now, Darren, we got to get you on our podcast, Chuyện Du học, Overseas Studies, to talk about similar topics.
Sure.
I need to turn this around on you and have you answer all these questions.
For sure, Tony. Thank you so much.
Awesome, sir.
Thanks for listening to the Touch MBA podcast. Remember, you can get free school selection help and a profile review at touchmba.com. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. Just search for Touch